On December 3, 2022, 47 million people watched The Rock have a mental breakdown on live television, and what triggered it was a single question nobody saw coming. But what the cameras captured that night would reveal a truth about Dwayne Johnson that even his closest friends never knew existed. The Saturday Night Live studio buzzed with its usual pre-show energy. Writers clutched coffee cups like lifelines, actors rehearsed lines in darkened corners, and crew members moved with the practiced urgency of a machine that had been running for nearly 5 decades. But tonight felt different. Electric. Dangerous. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was set to host for the third time, promoting his latest film while delivering the kind of motivational energy that had made him America's most beloved action star. The monologue was scripted, the sketches rehearsed, and the musical guest ready. Everything was perfectly planned. Except for what was about to happen at 11:47 p.m. Eastern Time. The first sign something was wrong came during dress rehearsal. Dwayne stood center stage, his massive frame commanding the space as always, but his usual confidence seemed brittle around the edges. The makeup team had noticed it first, the way his hands trembled slightly when he thought no one was looking, how he kept checking his phone between takes, the hollow look in his eyes that no amount of stage lighting could mask. "You okay, DJ?" asked Kenan Thompson during a quick costume change. They'd worked together before, and Kenan had developed an eye for performers who were struggling beneath the surface. Dwayne flashed his million-dollar smile, the one that had graced movie posters and magazine covers around the world. "Just tired, man. You know how it is, back-to-back shoots, press tours, the usual grind." But it wasn't the usual grind. And Kenan could see it. What the audience at home didn't know, what nobody knew except Dwayne's inner circle, was that The Rock was in the middle of the worst mental health crisis of his life. For 6 months he'd been spiraling, triggered by a combination of factors that had created a perfect storm of psychological breakdown. It started with his father's death in January 2020. Rocky Johnson, the wrestling legend who had shaped Dwayne's entire worldview, passed away suddenly from a heart attack. But Dwayne hadn't grieved properly. Instead, he'd thrown himself into work with an intensity that worried everyone around him. More movies, more business deals, more social media posts radiating positivity and strength. The facade had held for 2 years. Until it didn't. The breaking point had come 3 weeks earlier, during what should have been a routine business meeting. Dwayne was reviewing contracts for his production company when he found himself unable to speak. Not because he was emotional, but because his brain simply stopped processing language. For 7 minutes, he sat in that conference room, surrounded by lawyers and executives, unable to form words or understand what people were saying to him. His assistant rushed him to a private medical facility, where doctors ran every test imaginable. Brain scans, blood work, neurological evaluations. Everything came back normal. The diagnosis was stress-induced dissociation, a psychological response to overwhelming pressure that causes the mind to essentially disconnect from reality as a protective mechanism. "Mr. Johnson, Elena Rodriguez had explained, your brain is trying to shut down non-essential functions to protect itself from what it perceives as a threat. The threat isn't physical, it's emotional and psychological. You're carrying trauma that you've never processed, and it's finally demanding your attention." But Dwayne Johnson didn't have time for trauma. He had a billion-dollar empire to run, a family to support, and millions of fans who looked to him for daily inspiration. Mental breakdowns were for other people, not The Rock. So he did what he'd always done, he powered through. Which brings us back to that Saturday night at 30 Rockefeller Plaza, where 47 million people were about to witness what happens when powering through stops being an option. The show opened perfectly. Dwayne's monologue was vintage Rock, funny, self-deprecating, motivational. He joked about his workout routine, his tequila brand, and his transformation from wrestler to movie star. The audience loved it. Social media lit up with praise. Everything was going according to plan. The first sketch was a parody of Fast Furious, with Dwayne playing an exaggerated version of himself who solves family problems through increasingly ridiculous action sequences. The audience roared with laughter as he rescued a cat from a tree using a helicopter and solved a parking dispute with a tank. The second sketch was a fake commercial for Rock Soap, a cleaning product so strong it could wash away your problems along with dirt. Dwayne delivered every line with perfect timing, his charisma filling the studio. But during the third sketch, something shifted. The scene was set in a therapist's office, with Dwayne playing a patient who refuses to admit he has any problems. It was meant to be comedy, the unstoppable Rock insisting he doesn't need therapy while clearly falling apart. The audience was supposed to laugh at the irony. Instead, they watched in growing discomfort as the sketch became uncomfortably real. "So, Mr. Johnson," said Kate McKinnon, playing the therapist, "when did you first start feeling like you had to be strong for everyone else?" Dwayne's response was scripted. "I don't know what you mean. I'm always strong. It's not an act, it's just who I am." But as he delivered the line, something happened. His voice cracked slightly on the word, am. Not enough for most people to notice, but enough for the cameras to catch. Enough for him to realize that the line wasn't just a script anymore, it was his truth. Kate continued with her scripted response. "But don't you ever get tired of carrying everyone else's expectations?" This was where Dwayne was supposed to deliver a punchline about his workout routine. Instead, he went quiet. For 5 seconds that felt like an eternity, he just stared at Kate, his eyes filling with something that looked dangerously close to tears. In the control room, producer Lorne Michaels leaned forward. "This wasn't in the script, Mr. Johnson." Kate improvised, staying in character but clearly concerned. "Are you okay?" And that's when it happened. Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, the man who had inspired millions with his unbreakable spirit and relentless positivity, looked directly into the camera and said 6 words that would change everything. "No, I'm not okay. I'm dying." The studio fell silent. Not the kind of silence that follows a punchline, waiting for laughter. The kind of silence that follows a confession, heavy with truth and fear. Dwayne continued, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying to every corner of the studio. "I've been dying for 2 years and I've been lying to everyone about it. Including myself." In the control room, Michaels made a split-second decision that would define his career. Instead of cutting to commercial, he let the cameras roll. "I watched my dad die," Dwayne continued, tears now flowing freely down his face, "and I didn't cry. I gave a speech at his funeral about strength and legacy and moving forward. And the next day, I posted a workout video on Instagram like nothing happened." The audience was transfixed. This wasn't performance art or an elaborate sketch. This was a human being breaking down in real time, broadcast live to millions of homes. "You want to know what strength really is?" Dwayne asked, looking directly into the camera. "Strength is admitting that you're not strong. Strength is saying that the person everyone thinks they know doesn't actually exist. That person is a character I created to survive." Kate McKinnon, one of the most professional performers in television, was crying now too. Still in character, she asked softly, "What would happen if you stopped performing?" Dwayne laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "I don't know. I've been performing for so long, I don't remember who I am underneath it all. I wake up every morning and put on The Rock like a costume. I smile and post motivational quotes and tell people to chase their dreams, and then I go home and sit in my car in the garage for an hour because I don't know how to be human anymore." The confession continued for another 3 minutes, 3 minutes that felt like a lifetime for everyone watching. Dwayne talked about the pressure of being everyone's inspiration, the weight of never being allowed to have bad days, the exhaustion of maintaining a perfect image when you're falling apart inside. "My daughter asked me last week if I ever get sad," he said, his voice breaking. "And I realized I couldn't remember the last time I let myself feel anything real. Everything is just performance. Even with my own family." Finally, Kate broke character completely. She stood up, walked over to Dwayne and hugged him. Not as a sketch partner, but as one human being comforting another. The audience erupted in applause, not the excited applause of entertainment, but the warm, supportive applause of people witnessing courage. Lorne Michaels made another decision. Instead of going to commercial, he walked onto the stage himself, something he'd done maybe 5 times in 47 years of producing the show. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying across the studio and into living rooms around the world, "what you just witnessed wasn't part of tonight's show. But it was the most important thing we've ever broadcast." The show ended there. No musical guest, no goodbye wave, no weekend update. Just a man who had finally stopped pretending to be superhuman, surrounded by people who had witnessed his humanity. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, #RockBreakdown was trending worldwide, but not in a negative way. Instead of mockery or criticism, social media exploded with support, gratitude, and shared stories. Millions of people talked about their own struggles with depression, anxiety, and the pressure to appear perfect. Mental health organizations reported a 400% increase in calls to their helplines that weekend. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline had their busiest night in history, but it wasn't because people were in crisis. It was because they were finally asking for help. Celebrities who had never spoken publicly about mental health began sharing their own stories. Athletes talked about performance anxiety. Entrepreneurs discussed burnout. Parents admitted to struggling with the pressure to be perfect role models. But the most important response came from Dwayne's own family. His daughter Simone posted a simple message on Instagram: "Dad, thank you for showing me that real strength means being honest about weakness. I love you more today than I ever have." Lauren Hashian, his wife, appeared on Good Morning America 2 days later with a message that brought the host to tears. "For 2 years, I watched my husband disappear behind this character he felt he had to play. Saturday night, I got my husband back." The aftermath of that night changed everything for Dwayne Johnson. He took a 6-month hiatus from all professional commitments, the first real break he'd taken in over a decade. He entered intensive therapy with Dr. Rodriguez, finally addressing not just his recent trauma but decades of accumulated pressure and expectation. "I realized I'd been living my entire adult life in response to other people's needs," he would later reflect. "My dad needed me to be tough. The wrestling fans needed me to be entertaining. Movie audiences needed me to be heroic. Social media followers needed me to be inspiring. But nobody ever asked what I needed." The therapy process was brutal. Dwayne had to deconstruct the persona he'd spent decades building and figure out who he actually was underneath it all. There were days when he couldn't get out of bed. Days when he questioned everything he'd ever accomplished. Days when he wondered if people would still love him if they knew who he really was. The answer, it turned out, was yes. When Dwayne returned to public life 6 months later, he was fundamentally different. Still strong, still inspiring, still The Rock, but now he was also human. His social media posts began including honest discussions about mental health. His interviews addressed the pressure of perfectionism. His movies started featuring characters who were vulnerable as well as heroic. But perhaps the most significant change was in his relationship with his fans. The Rock had always been loved for his strength and positivity. Now he was loved for his honesty and vulnerability. People didn't see him as a superhuman figure anymore. They saw him as a real person who happened to be famous, which somehow made his achievements even more inspiring. "I used to think that if people saw me struggle, they'd lose faith in me," Dwayne explained during his first interview after returning. "Instead, I learned that when people see you struggle and keep going anyway, they find hope." The Saturday Night Live episode became one of the most watched and most discussed in the show's history. Not because it was funny, but because it was real. NBC received thousands of requests to air it again, leading to the unprecedented decision to rebroadcast a live episode during primetime. Mental health advocates hailed it as a watershed moment in the public discussion of psychological wellness. The episode won a Peabody Award for its unexpected and powerful contribution to destigmatizing mental health struggles in American culture. But for Dwayne, the most meaningful response came from the hundreds of thousands of letters he received from people who said his breakdown had given them permission to have their own. "You showed me that it's okay to not be okay," wrote a teenager from Ohio. "I've been pretending to be happy for so long that I forgot it was pretending. I'm a CEO and I've never let anyone see me cry," wrote a business executive from Texas. "After watching you, I finally told my board that I needed help with stress. It probably saved my life. I'm in the military and we're taught that showing emotion is weakness," wrote a soldier stationed overseas. "You helped me understand that hiding emotion is what makes you weak." The letters kept coming for months, each one a reminder that his moment of breakdown had become a moment of breakthrough for countless others. 2 years later, Dwayne Johnson established the Real Strength Foundation, a mental health organization focused specifically on helping people in high-pressure careers, athletes, entertainers, executives, and others who feel they can't afford to show vulnerability. "Strength isn't about never falling down," became the foundation's motto. "It's about getting back up and helping others do the same." The foundation's first public service announcement featured footage from that Saturday Night Live episode, followed by Dwayne speaking directly to the camera. "On December 3, 2022, I stopped pretending to be perfect. It was the scariest thing I've ever done. It was also the most important." Today, when people talk about The Rock's greatest achievement, they don't always mention his wrestling championships or his movie career or his business empire. Sometimes they talk about the night he cried on live television and showed the world that even superheroes need help sometimes. The mental breakdown that was supposed to end his career became the moment that gave it real meaning. Because 47 million people didn't just watch The Rock fall apart that night. They watched him fall apart and put himself back together, stronger than before, not because he hid his weakness but because he shared it. And in doing so, he gave millions of others permission to do the same. The boy who had learned to be strong for everyone else finally learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you're not strong enough. That night at Saturday Night Live, The Rock didn't just break down. He broke through to a kind of strength that can't be built in any gym, can't be scripted by any writer, and can't be performed by any actor. The strength to be human. And 47 million people watched it happen, live and unfiltered, proving that sometimes the most powerful moments aren't the ones we plan for, they're the ones we can't control. The cameras captured every second of it. But more importantly, they captured the moment when America's strongest man showed the world what real strength actually looks like. It looks like tears. It looks like truth. It looks like standing up after falling down, not because you have to, but because you choose to. And it looks like helping others do the same.